This article outlines the history of Wells Fargo and AMP Company from its origins to its merger with Norwest Corporation and beyond. The new company chose to retain the name of Wells Fargo, and so this article also includes the history after the merger. For a general overview of the activities of the current company, see the main entry under Wells Fargo. Early history. Origins. During the California Gold Rush in early 1848 at Sutter's Mill near Coloma, California, financiers and entrepreneurs from all over North America and the world flocked to California, drawn by the promise of huge profits. Vermont native Henry Wells and New Yorker William G. Fargo watched the California economy boom with keen interest. Before either Wells or Fargo could pursue opportunities offered in the western United States, however, they had business to attend to in the eastern United States. Wells, founder of Wells & Company, and Fargo, a partner in Livingston, Fargo & Company, and mayor of Buffalo, NY from 1862 to 1863 and again from 1864 to 1865, were major figures in the young and fiercely competitive express industry. In 1849, a new rival, John Warren Butterfield, founder of Butterfield Oason and AMP Company, entered the express business. Butterfield, Wells and Fargo soon realized that their competition was destructive and wasteful, and in 1850 they decided to join forces to form the American Express Company. Soon after the new company was formed, Wells, the first president of American Express, and Fargo, its vice president, proposed expanding the business to California. Fearing that American Express's most powerful rival, Adams & Company, would acquire a monopoly in the West, the majority of the American Express Company's directors balked. Undaunted, Wells and Fargo decided to start their own business while continuing to fulfill their responsibilities as officers and directors of American Express. Foundation of Wells Fargo. On March 18, 1852, they organized Wells, Fargo and AMP Company, a joint stock company with an initial capitalization of $300,000, to provide express and banking services to California. The original board of directors comprised Wells, Fargo, Johnston Livingston, Elijah P. Williams, Edwin B. Morgan, James McKay, Alpheus Reynolds, Alexander M. C. Smith and Henry D. Rice. Of these, Wells, Fargo, Livingston and McKay were also on the board of American Express. Financier Edwin B. Morgan of Aurora, Cayuga County, New York, was appointed Wells Fargo's first president. They commenced business May 20, 1852, the day their announcement appeared in the New York Times. The company's arrival in San Francisco was announced in the Alta California of July 3, 1852. The immediate challenge facing Morgan and Danford N. Barney, who became president in November 1853, was to establish the company in two highly competitive fields under conditions of rapid growth and unpredictable change. At the time, California regulated neither the banking nor the express industry, so both fields were wide open. Anyone with a wagon and team of horses could open an express company, and all it took to open a bank was a safe and a room to keep it in. Because of its comparatively late entry into the California market, Wells Fargo faced well-established competition in both fields. For the beginning, the fledgling company offered diverse and mutually supportive services: general forwarding and commissions, buying and selling of gold dust bullion and specie, and freight service between New York and California. Under Morgan's and Barney's direction, express and banking offered offices were quickly established in key communities bordering the goldfields, and a network of freight and messenger routes was soon in place throughout California. Barney's policy of subcontracting express services to established companies, rather than duplicating existing services, was a key factor in Wells Fargo's early success, expansion into overland mail services, and the Panic of 1857. In 1855, Wells Fargo faced its first crisis when the California banking system collapsed as a result of unsound speculation. A bank run on Page, Bacon and Amp Company of San Francisco Bank began when the collapse of its St. Louis, Missouri parent was made public. The run soon spread to other major financial institutions, all of which, including Wells Fargo, were forced to close the doors. The following Tuesday, Wells Fargo reopened in sound condition, despite a loss of 1/3 of its net worth. Wells Fargo was one of the few financial and express companies to survive the panic, partly because it kept sufficient assets on hand to meet customers' demands rather than transferring all its assets to New York. Surviving the Panic of 1855 gave Wells Fargo two advantages. First, it faced virtually no competition in the banking and express business in California after the crisis. Second, Wells Fargo attained a reputation for dependability and soundness. From 1855 through 1866, Wells Fargo expanded rapidly, becoming the West's all-purpose business, communications, and transportation agent. Under Barney's direction, the company developed its own stagecoach business, helped start and then took over Butterfield Overland Mail, and participated in the Pony Express. This period culminated with the Grand Consolidation of 1866, when Wells Fargo consolidated the ownership and operation of the entire overland mail route from the Missouri River to the Pacific Ocean and many stagecoach lines in the western states. In its early days, Wells Fargo participated in the staging business to support its banking and express businesses, but the character of Wells Fargo's participation changed when it helped start the Overland Mail Company. Overland Mail was organized in 1857 by men with substantial interests in four of the leading express companies: American Express, United States Express, Adams Express Company, and Wells Fargo. John Butterfield, the third founder of American Express, was made Overland Mail's president. In 1858, Overland Mail was awarded a government contract to carry United States Postal Service mail over the southern overland route from Memphis and St. Louis to California. For the beginning, Wells Fargo was Overland Mail's banker and primary lender. In 1859, there was a crisis when Congress failed to pass the annual Post Office Appropriation Bill, thereby leaving the Post Office with no way to pay for the Overland Mail Company's services. As Overland Mail's indebtedness to Wells Fargo climbed, Wells Fargo became increasingly disenchanted with Butterfield's management strategy. In March 1860, Wells Fargo threatened foreclosure. As a compromise, Butterfield resigned as president of Overland Mail, and control of the company passed to Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo, however, did not acquire ownership of the company until the consolidation of 1866. Wells Fargo's involvement in Overland Mail led to its participation in the Pony Express in the last 6 of the Express's 18 months of existence. Russell, Mages and Waddell launched the privately owned and operated Pony Express. By the end of 1860, the Pony Express was in deep financial trouble. Its fees did not cover its costs, and, without government subsidies and lucrative mail contracts, it could not make up the difference. After Overland Mail, by then controlled by Wells Fargo, was awarded a $1 million government contract in early 1861 to provide daily mail service over a central route. Wells Fargo took over the western portion of the Pony Express route from Salt Lake City, Utah to San Francisco. Russell, Mages and Amp Waddell continued to operate the eastern leg from Salt Lake City to St. Joseph, Missouri, under subcontract. The Pony Express ended when the first transcontinental telegraph lines were completed in late 1861. Overland mail and express services were continued, however, by the coordinated efforts of several companies. From 1862 to 1865, Wells Fargo operated a private express line between San Francisco and Virginia City, Nevada. Overland mail stagecoaches covered the central Nevada route from Carson City, Nevada to Salt Lake City, and Ben Holliday, who had acquired the business of Russell, Mages and Amp Waddell, ran a stagecoach line from Salt Lake City to Missouri. Takeover of Holliday Overland. By 1866, Holliday had built a staging empire with lines in 8 western states and was challenging Wells Fargo's supremacy in the West. A showdown between the two transportation giants in late 1866 resulted in Wells Fargo's purchase of Holliday's operations. The grand consolidation spawned a new enterprise that operated under the Wells Fargo name and combined the Wells Fargo, Holliday, and Overland mail lines and became the undisputed stagecoach leader. Barney resigned as president of Wells Fargo to devote more time to his own business, the United States Express Company. Lewis McLean replaced him when the merger was completed on November 1, 1866. The Wells Fargo stagecoach empire was short-lived, although the Central Pacific Railroad, already operating over the Sierra Mountains to Reno, Nevada, carried Wells Fargo's express. The company did not have an exclusive contract. Moreover, the Union Pacific Railroad was encroaching on the territory served by Wells Fargo stage lines. Ashbel H. Barney, Danforth Barney's brother and co-founder of United States Express Company, replaced McLean as president in 1869. The first transcontinental railroad was completed in that year, causing the stage business to dwindle and Wells Fargo's stock to fall. Takeover of the Pacific Union Express Company. Central Pacific Railroad promoters, led by Daniel Pepe, organized the Pacific Union Express Company to compete with Wells Fargo. The Tevis Group also started buying up Wells Fargo stock at its sharply reduced price. On October 4, 1869, William Fargo, his brother Charles, and Ashbel Barney met with Tevis and his associates in Omaha, Nebraska. The Wells Fargo agreed to buy the Pacific Union Express Company at a much inflated price and received exclusive express rights for 10 years on the Central Pacific Railroad and a much-needed infusion of capital. All of this, however, came at a price. Control of Wells Fargo shifted to Tevis. Ashbel Barney resigned in 1870 and was replaced as president by William Fargo. In 1872, William Fargo also resigned to devote full time to his duties as president of American Express. Lloyd Tevis replaced Fargo as president of Wells Fargo. Growth. The company expanded rapidly under Tevis management. The number of banking and express offices grew from 436 in 1871 to 3,500 at the turn of the century. During this period, Wells Fargo also established the first transcontinental express line, using more than a dozen railroads. The company first gained access to the lucrative East Coast markets beginning in 1888, successfully promoted the use of refrigerated freight cars in California, had opened branch banks in Virginia City, Carson City, and Salt Lake City, Utah by 1876, and opened a branch bank in New York City by 1880. Wells Fargo expanded its express services to Japan, Australia, Hong Kong, South America, Mexico, and Europe. In 1885, Wells Fargo also began selling money orders. In 1892, John J. Valentine, Sr., a longtime Wells Fargo employee, was made president of the company. Until 1876, both banking and express operations of Wells Fargo in San Francisco were carried on in the same building at the northeast corner of California and Montgomery Streets. In 1876, the locations were separated, with the banking department moving to a building at the northeast corner of California and Sansom Streets. The bank moved in 1891 to the corner of Sansom and Market Streets, where it remained until 1905. Of the branch banks that at Carson City was sold to the Bullion and Amp Exchange Bank there in 1891, the Virginia City Bank was sold to Isaias W. Hellman's Nevada Bank in 1891, and the Salt Lake City Bank was sold to the Walker Brothers there in 1894. The New York City branch remained until the Wells Fargo and Amp Company Bank merged with Hellman's Bank in 1905. 1900 to 1940. Valentine died in late December 1901 and was succeeded as president by Dudley Evans on January 2, 1902. In 1905, Wells Fargo separated its banking and express operations. Edward H. Harriman, a prominent financier and dominant figure in Southern Pacific Railroad and Union Pacific Railroad, had gained control of Wells Fargo. Harriman reached an agreement with Isaias W. Hellman, a Los Angeles banker, to merge Wells Fargo's bank with the Nevada National Bank. Founded in 1875 by the Nevada silver moguls James Graham Fair, James Careflood, John William Mackay, and William S. O'Brien, to form the Wells Fargo Nevada National Bank. The Wells Fargo Nevada National Bank opened its doors on April 22, 1905, with the following board of directors: Isaias W. Hellman, President; Isaias W. Hellman, Jr. and F.A. Bigelow, Vice Presidents; Frederick L. Lipman, Cashier; Frank B. King, George Grant, William McGavin and John E. Miles, Assistant Cashiers; E.H. Harriman, William F. Herron and Dudley Evans, directors. By 1906, Levi Strauss had also joined the board. Evans was president of Wells Fargo and Amp Company Express until his death in April 1910, when he was succeeded by William Sproul. Burns D. Caldwell was elected president in October 1911. Wells Fargo and Amp Company Express continued its operations until 1918, when the government forced the company to consolidate its domestic operations with those of the other major express companies. This wartime measure resulted in the formation of American Railway Express, which began operations July 1, 1918, with Caldwell as chairman of the board and George C. Taylor of American Express as president. Wells Fargo continued some overseas express operations until the 1960s, as an operator of bank armored cars. It did business as Wells Fargo Armored Security Corporation and Wells Fargo Armored Service. The armored car business merged with competitor Loomis in 1997, originally as Loomis Fargo and Amp Company, after other reorganizations. It is now known simply as Loomis. The 2 years following the 1905 merger tested the capacities of Hellman and the newly reorganized banks. The 1906 San Francisco earthquake and fire destroyed most of the city's business district, including the Wells Fargo Nevada National Bank building. However, the bank's vaults and credit were left intact, and the bank committed its resources to restoring San Francisco. Money flowed into San Francisco Francisco from around the country to support rapid reconstruction of the city. As a result, the bank's deposits increased dramatically, from $16 million to $35 million in 18 months. The Panic of 1907, which began in New York in October, followed on the heels of this frenetic reconstruction period. Several New York banks, deeply involved in efforts to manipulate the stock market, experienced a run when speculators were unable to pay for stock they had purchased. The run quickly spread to other New York banks, which were forced to suspend payment, and then to Chicago and the rest of the country. Wells Fargo lost $1 million in deposits weekly for 6 weeks in a row. The years following the panic were committed to a slow and painstaking recovery. Hellman died on April 9, 1920, and was succeeded as president by his son, Isaiah Jr., who died a month later, on May 10, 1920. Frederick L. Lippman was then elected president. Lippman's management strategy included both expansion and the conservative banking practices of his predecessors. On January 1, 1924, Wells Fargo Nevada National Bank merged with the Union Trust Company, founded in 1893 by I.W. Hellman, to form the Wells Fargo Bank and Amp Union Trust Company. The bank prospered during the 1920s, and Lippman's careful reinvestment of the bank's earnings placed their bank in a good position to survive the Great Depression. Following the collapse of the banking system in 1933, the company was able to extend immediate and substantial help to its troubled correspondents. Lippman retired on January 10, 1935, and was succeeded as president by Robert Burns Motherwell II, 1940 to 1970. The war years were prosperous and uneventful for Wells Fargo. Isaiah W. Hellman III was elected president in 1943. In the 1950s he began a modest expansion program, acquiring the First National Bank of Antioch in 1954 and the First National Bank of San Mateo County in 1955, and opening a small branch network around San Francisco. In 1954 the name of the bank was shortened to Wells Fargo Bank, to capitalize on frontier imagery and in preparation for further expansion. In 1960, Hellman engineered the merger of Wells Fargo Bank with American Trust Company, a large Northern California retail banking system and the second oldest financial institution in California, to form the Wells Fargo Bank and Amp American Trust Company. Ransom M. Cook was president with Hellman as chairman. The name was again shortened to Wells Fargo Bank in 1962. In 1964, H. Stephen Chase was elected president with Cook as chairman. This merger of California's two oldest banks created the 11th largest banking institution in the United States. Following the merger, Wells Fargo's involvement in international banking greatly accelerated. The company opened a Tokyo representative office and, eventually, additional branch offices in Seoul, Hong Kong, and Nassau, Bahamas, as well as representative offices in Mexico City, Sao Paulo, Caracas, Buenos Aires, and Singapore. On November 10, 1966, Wells Fargo's board of directors elected Richard P. Cooley president and CEO. At 42, Cooley was one of the youngest men to head a major bank. Stephen Chase became chairman. Cooley's rise to the top had been a quick one. Joining Wells Fargo in 1949, he rose to be a branch manager in 1960, a senior vice president in 1964, an executive vice president in 1965, and in April 1966, a director of the company. A year later, Cooley enticed Ernest C. Arbuckle, dean of the Stanford Graduate School of Business, to join Wells Fargo's board as chairman when Chase retired in January 1968. In 1967, Wells Fargo, together with 3 other California banks, introduced a master charge card to its customers as part of its plan to challenge Bank of America in the consumer lending business. Initially, 30,000 merchants participated in the plan. Cooley's early strategic initiatives were in the direction of making Wells Fargo's branch network statewide. The Federal Reserve had blocked the bank's earlier attempts to acquire an established bank in Southern California. As a result, Wells Fargo had to build its own branch system. This expansion was costly and depressed the bank's earnings in the later 1960s. In 1968, Wells Fargo changed from a state to a federal banking charter, in part so that it could set up subsidiaries for businesses such as equipment leasing and credit cards rather than having to create special divisions within the bank. The charter conversion was completed August 15, 1968, with the bank renamed Wells Fargo Bank, N.A. The bank successfully completed a number of acquisitions during 1968 as well. The Bank of Pasadena, First National Bank of Azusa Valley Savings Bank, and Sonoma Mortgage Corporation were all integrated into Wells Fargo's operations. In 1969, Wells Fargo formed a holding company, Wells Fargo and AMP Company, and purchased the rights to its own name from American Express. Although the bank always had the right to use the name for banking, American Express had retained the right to use it for other financial services. Wells Fargo could now use its name in any area of financial services it chose. 1970 to 1980. Between 1970 and 1975, Wells Fargo's domestic profits rose faster than those of any other U.S. bank. Wells Fargo's loans to businesses increased dramatically after 1971. To meet the demand for credit, the bank frequently borrowed short-term from the Federal Reserve to lend at higher rates of interest to businesses and individuals. In 1973, a tighter monetary policy made this arrangement less profitable, but Wells Fargo saw an opportunity in the new interest limits on passbook savings. When the allowable rate increased to 5%, Wells Fargo was the first to begin paying the higher rate. The bank attracted many new customers as a result, and within 2 years its market share of the retail savings trade increased more than 2 points. A substantial increase in California's competitive banking climate. With its increased deposits, Wells Fargo was able to reduce its borrowings from the Federal Reserve, and the 0.5% premium it paid for deposits was more than made up for by the savings in interest payments. In 1975, the rest of the California banks instituted a 5% passbook savings rate, but they failed to recapture the market share. In 1973, the bank made a number of key policy changes. Wells Fargo decided to go after the medium-sized corporate and consumer loan businesses where interest rates were higher. Slowly, Wells Fargo eliminated its excess debt, and by 1974, its balance sheet showed a much healthier bank. Under Carly Reichardt, who later became president of the bank, Wells Fargo's real estate lending bolstered the bottom line. The bank focused on California's flourishing home and apartment mortgage business and left risky commercial developments to other banks. While Wells Fargo's domestic operations were making it the envy of competitors in the early 1970s, its international operations were less secure. The bank's 25% holding in Allgemeine Deutsche Kreditanstalt, a West Germany bank, cost Wells Fargo $4 million due to bad real estate loans. Another joint banking venture, the Western American Bank, which was formed in London in 1968 with several other American banks, was hard hit by the recession of 1974 and failed. Unfavorable exchange rates hit Wells Wells Fargo for another $2 million in 1975. In response, the bank slowed its overseas expansion program and concentrated on developing overseas branches of its own rather than tying itself to the fortunes of other banks. Wells Fargo's investment services became a leader during the late 1970s. According to Institutional Investor, Wells Fargo garnered more new accounts from the 350 largest pension funds between 1975 and 1980 than any other money manager. The bank's aggressive marketing of its services included seminars explaining modern portfolio theory. Wells Fargo's early success, particularly with indexing weighting investments to match the weightings of the S&P 500, brought many new clients aboard. Arbuckle retired as chairman at the end of 1977. Cooley assumed the chairmanship in January 1978 with Reichert succeeding him as president. Meanwhile, Wells Fargo secured a major legal victory that would guarantee its long-term prosperity in its home market of California. On May 16, 1978, after 8 years of litigation in both federal and state courts, the Supreme Court of California ruled in Wells Fargo's favor and upheld the constitutionality of California's statutory non-judicial foreclosure procedure against a due process challenge. Thus, Wells Fargo could continue to provide credit to borrowers at very affordable rates. Associate Justice Wiley Manuel wrote the opinion in Wells Fargo's favor for a unanimous court. The victory was especially remarkable since during the tenure of Chief Justice Rosebird, the court was notorious for its pro-plaintiff and anti-business bias. By the end of the 1970s, Wells Fargo's overall growth had slowed somewhat. Earnings were only up 12% in 1979, compared with an average of 19% between 1973 and 1978. In 1980, Cooley told Fortune, "It's time to slow down. The last 5 years have created too great a strain on our capital, liquidity, and people.